Well, you don't have to look around the world very long before you realize there are different colored people out there. I remember as my first time I saw a real black person. I don't mean brown, I mean black. Came from Africa. Black as my coat. I was in Atlanta, Georgia. This guy was visiting from Ethiopia. And I was probably 7 years old. And I couldn't believe it. Not only was he black, his wife was black, and they had a baby that was black. I mean, black, black. I'd seen lots of brown people. I'd never seen a black one. It was like, wow. Where do the races come from? Actually, I don't think we should use the word races. There aren't different races. There are simply different skin colors. For instance, would you call these different races of cows? No, okay. They all look the same in the meat locker, and they all taste the same on the hamburger, okay? They're just skin color, all right? But there are 4 different theories of where the different skin colors come from. And I'll probably use the word races by habit, but I don't mean skin colors, okay? The first theory is Adam and Eve were medium brown and produced all the varieties in their own children. It's simply a melanin count in the skin. There's a black couple that had 3 albino children. They didn't have much melanin in their skin, okay? The second theory says the Lord put a mark upon Cain. And there are those who argue that Cain became black because of killing Abel. I think that's a stupid theory, but it's amazing how many folks believe that. The Mormons, for instance, teach that Cain was black, and black skin is a curse, the curse of Cain. They said it's the Lord's doing. But the Mormons teach that up in heaven, God the Father has thousands of wives, and He has sex with all these wives, and they produce spirit babies. Those spirit babies, if they're valiant, they come down to earth and get a white-skinned body. If they're not valiant, they come down and get a black-skinned body. So they look at black people and think, well, you were just inferior in your first life. What a dumb way to live. But that's what the Mormons teach, okay? They said, Cain, Ham, the whole Negro race have been cursed with black skin, the mark of Cain. This guy said, if there's one drop of Negro blood in my children, as I read to you, they receive the curse. Shall I tell you the law of God in regard to the African race? If the white man who belongs to the chosen seed mixes his blood with the seed of Cain, the penalty is death on the spot. And the good book, Secret History of the Mormon Church, covers a lot of the people who've been killed in Mormonism, you know, for violating the Mormon laws. The third theory says God put a curse on Canaan. Don't confuse Canaan with Cain. Canaan was Noah's grandson. If you read Genesis chapter 9, it says, Noah woke from his wine and knew what his younger son had done and said, Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servant shall he be. Twice the Bible says Canaan shall be a servant. And there are those who argue black people are supposed to be servants because God put a curse on Canaan. Okay, now I agree with the God put a curse on Canaan, but where do you get black people are supposed to be servants out of that? Aren't you assuming that Canaan was black and this curse applies to him? I don't believe that one either. The fourth theory, and I think the only logical theory in all of this, is the Tower of Babel is what caused it. God told them, hey, spread out. They said, no, we're staying right here, and they built a big tower, and God got angry and confused their languages. But not only did He divide the languages, He divided their tongues, their families, and their nations. Genesis chapter 10. Shem is writing this. Shem's the guy who kept the records of all the family records, you know. Chapter 10. It's interesting. Small inbreeding groups will cause unusual traits to become very pronounced. For instance, for years, the Habsburgs had to marry royalty. That's just the rule. Well, sometimes the only royalty available to marry was your niece or your aunt or your sister. So they would marry royalty, and pretty soon they started looking real strange. You could tell, though, he's a Habsburg. Got real long nose, stupid-looking chin, and you know, he's got to be a Habsburg, okay? They look dumb. This is a picture of the feet of a guy. They're called the ostrich people in Africa. There's a tribe of folks in Zimbabwe. They are required to marry within the tribe. But there's only like 200 of them. So they are always marrying sisters or nieces or cousins. Always. The ultimate redneck. They only got 2 toes. Their teeth fall out in the middle of the night while they're sleeping. That's a result of incredible inbreeding. Unusual traits can become permanent with inbreeding, and that might have happened with the Tower of Babel. Genesis 10 says, the nations were divided after the flood. Not only the languages, the nations were divided. There's a great book on this topic by Bill Cooper. I got one here. It's in the library. After the Flood. Bill Cooper. Incredible book if you want to read that. About the dispersion of the sons of Noah. What happened? Well, Japheth, one of the 3 sons, had about 14 kids and grandkids. It's a little difficult to count, believe it or not. You read Genesis 10 and see if you can count it. Try to do better than that. Okay, it's hard to tell who goes with who. But by my count, 14 kids and grandkids for Japheth. Ham had 31 kids and grandkids. One of them was Canaan.
So guys, over the years, we've seen very many people trying to explain the origin of mankind. We have the creation theory, we have the mythical theory, and then we have the scientific theory. The scientific theory is also known as the Darwinian theory, where Darwin tries to explain that organisms develop from unicellular cells. Organisms such as amoeba is where human beings evolved from. That is the theory of Charles Darwin. We also have the creation theory. The creation theory is based on religious aspects. Religious aspects such as the aspect of Christianity, the aspect of Hinduism, the aspect of Judaism, the aspect of Islam, and the aspect of other religions known or not known to mankind. Right now, there is a white man who is trying to explain the origin of people, or rather the origin of races according to the Bible, and this is a perspective that I think you as a black person, or you as anyone who is watching this video should listen to, and let's gather what this white man has to say, and then by the end of the video I shall share with you my thoughts, where we shall also have a deep critical analysis. So without further ado, let's dive into this video.
Now, if the curse was on Canaan, we got a problem. Because the Bible tells us Egypt is the land of Ham. Psalm 105, Psalm 106, Egypt is the land of Ham. The children of Ham migrated to Egypt. Africa was actually settled by the descendants of Ham. Black people apparently came from Ham. Japheth is the father of the Europeans, and Shem is the father of the Orientals, which includes Jesus Christ. They're considered actually Oriental, the Middle East, okay? Shem had 29 kids and grandkids. So by my count, and my count only, I would say there are about 75 original nations and languages at the Tower of Babel, just adding up those three sons and their descendants. So I suspect when God confused the languages, there were about 75 of them, just purely based on this graph here, this chart here. Most folks who study English will tell you that English, German, and Danish have a common root language. There are hundreds and hundreds of words that are identical. Here's Beowulf poem in 518 AD. This is English, actually, from 1,500 years ago. Today's English is nothing like ancient English, and ancient English was very Germanic, okay? Spanish, Italian, French, and Latin had a common root language. You can compare the words. People that speak Spanish can go to Italy and get along pretty good. People that speak Ukrainian can listen to Russian and get along pretty good. A lot of languages have common roots. There's a good book about the Chinese language, The Discovery of Genesis, it's called. If you want to get one of these, it's, I forget, $10, $9, showing how the original Chinese characters, not the ones they use today, but the original ancient Chinese pictograms were actually telling the creation story. For instance, the symbol for boat is 8 mouths in a vessel. Noah's Ark had 8 people on it. The Chinese symbol for garden is dust plus breath plus 2 people in an enclosure. There's also more in this book, Search for the Truth, by Bruce Malone. A lot of his articles in here are really good and are on our website. You can read some of Bruce's articles. But this is also a good book you'd want to get on the topic. There's been a sequel, God's Promise to the Chinese, written about God's promise in the Chinese language. The Chinese symbol for righteous is a person under a lamb. The only way to be righteous is to be under the lamb. Their own words were telling them. By the way, we have a lot of that in English. And that would make a good sermon someday, too. We'll get another time on that. Today, there are about 1,200 recognized languages, plus thousands and thousands of dialects. They probably all broke up from the original 75 languages, just like, you know, Australian, Irish, and Georgian, people from Georgia or Alabama. Believe it or not, they all speak English. But it's a different dialect of English, okay? And if it weren't for rapid communication across the world today, they would be totally indecipherable in a few generations. When we were in Australia, I was at the restaurant. I said to the waitress, I said, "Ma'am, would you get me a napkin?" The preacher said, don't say that. I said, "Why?" He said, "Don't ask for a napkin over here. That's a diaper." I said, "What do I want?" He said, "You want a serviette." I said, "Oh, okay. Ma'am, can I have a serviette?" I thought I spoke English, you know. They don't speak English over there. They speak Australian, all right? But the Bible says pretty clearly in Acts 17, God hath made of one blood all nations of men to dwell on the earth. The Bible says in Malachi, have we not all one Father? There's no reason to be a racist because of your skin color. We cover more on that on video 5. They did a search for Adam and Eve, trying to find, you know, do we have a common ancestor? Using mitochondrial DNA changes, they found out we have a common ancestor only 200,000 years ago. One woman created this whole race, whole world. And then they did more studies on this mitochondrial DNA and said, wow, no, we all have a common ancestor only 6,000 years ago. And they said, no, that can't be right. Let's keep studying. Well, yeah, actually, we did have a common mother 6,000 years ago, and I even know her husband's name. Okay, Adam, and a couple other kids' names. This article says, we all related to a man who lived in Asia, 1400 BC. Science correspondent in Weekly Telegraph in UK. Everyone in the world is descended from a single person who lived around 3,500 years ago, according to a new study. Scientists worked out the most recent common ancestor of all 6 billion people alive today probably dwelt in Eastern Asia around 1400 BC. Although the date may seem relatively recent, researchers say the findings should not come as a surprise. Anyone trying to trace their family tree soon discovers the number of direct ancestors doubles every 20 years. How many of you have 2 parents? How many of you have 4 grandparents? How many have 8 great-grandparents? How many have 16 great-great-grandparents? I mean, you go keep going back, you got a whole bunch of folks in a hurry, right? Well, this creates a problem. And the article says, it takes only a few centuries to clock up thousands of direct ancestors. Using a computer model, researchers from the Massachusetts MIT attempted to trace back the most recent common ancestor using estimated patterns of migration through history, and they found out we all came from a common ancestor 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. I could have told them that just by reading the Bible. Save them a lot of time. Yep, we all have one common ancestor, Adam and Eve.
Look, boys and girls, the only reason there are white people is because black people came here first. And they faded as they moved farther and farther north from the equator. Their melanin faded so that their skin, their hair, and their eyes got lighter. Their brains didn't get smaller, but their skin, their hair, and their eyes got lighter. That's the only reason you children can call yourselves white. And you aren't white. We are all shades of black.
History of America is the history of rich white men telling not rich white people that their enemies are black and brown. It starts in the colonies of what would become the United States. Let's remember, during the colonial period, mid-1600s, there was no such thing as white people. I know some people who are now called white find that shocking, right? Because they think whiteness is real, right? But whiteness was created. Europeans didn't call themselves white. We didn't call ourselves white. We weren't all members of one big happy family. Are you kidding? Have you studied the history of Europe? The history of Europe was about killing each other. That's what we did in Europe. We just killed each other before we figured out there were other people to kill. We just killed each other, right? I mean, that was the history of Europe. The English hated the Irish, right? Northern Italians didn't even think that Southern Italians were Italians. The Germans hated everybody, and everybody hated their ass right back, right? There was no team called white, no race called white, but all of a sudden, in the middle of the 1600s, there was. Why? Why was it suddenly necessary to create this thing called the white race? Well, because rich people can count, that's why. And so rich folks looked around, the ones that owned all the land, you know, in the colonies, the colonial elite looked around and they realized something, that they were heavily outnumbered by African enslaved folks, by European indentured servants who were just one level above a slave, or other Europeans who weren't technically indentured servants, but they were still peasants, didn't have any money, didn't have any land, and they could do the math. They added it up and they were like, damn, we got to figure out a way to split these folks apart from one another or they're going to rise up and take our stuff, right? Because after a while, these black folks who were enslaved Africans and these quote-unquote white folks who were poor Europeans are going to figure out they're all getting played by these rich people, right? So ultimately, the rich figure out they got to come up with some way to get somebody in that group on their team. The easiest thing is to get the poor Europeans, right? Because at least they look like you. They sort of share some of the customs and the culture. So they all of a sudden create this thing called whiteness, and they say, now you're part of the club. Now we're going to let you testify in court, enter into contracts, vote, at least if you're a man, own a little bit of land, at least if you're a man, right? And we're going to get rid of indentured servitude. No more of that, because you're too good for that. And we're going to take the white men, now called white men, and put them on the slave patrol to keep black people in line. Give them a horse and a gun and a badge and make them feel big and powerful, right? They're still poor. They still don't have anything. They didn't pay the slave patrol well, right? Just exploited them, used them as a buffer between the elite and the other poor folks, particularly poor folks of color. And pretty soon the rebellions that occasionally happened where black and white got together to overthrow the elite, those stopped because the divide and conquer had begun to work, right? You could turn people against each other by telling those poor white folks they got to keep these black people in line. And so that divide and conquer gets initiated in the colonies. Rich white men telling not rich white people that their enemies are black and brown.
All human life originated in Lyra. And when Lyra fell during a war, long before one of the stars there exploded, they migrated out from Lyra during a war in order to preserve the race, and they went to different parts of our galaxy. So all human life originated from Lyra originally. Because of their environment, they will, from generation to generation, pick up physical changes, depending upon the surface and the organics of their planets, and so on and so forth. The different colored race skins have to do with genetics involving the stars in which that they're exposed to. So that's basically where they came from.
So their primary home star then is Lyra?
Yes.
And is that currently
Originally
still their home star?
No, there's no human life in Lyra.
So now where do they exist now?
In the constellation of Andromeda.
Okay. Throughout the constellation?
Yes.
Okay. They must be very plentiful then. There must be a great vast civilization there.
Yes, there is. It's an ancient race.
Have they described what their civilization is like to you?
Yes, they have.
Could you go into
Sure.
some of the details that strike you the most about their civilization?
They're essentially, no matter where they are, they're a one-world government. Their society would be approximately 4,700 years more advanced than ours on a spiritual level. On a technological level, they're 50,000 years.
Now,
But there's a balance between their technology and, in other words, the technology they create is based on a spiritual necessity to evolve and not on one to defend themselves, even though it can be used for that.
Now, when you say 4,700 years advanced spiritually,
Yes.
how do you measure spiritual advancement in years?
I don't really know. That's what they've expressed to me, and they don't even use time in their world. There's no such thing really, but they use those numbers to accommodate us so that we can use those as a point of reference.
I see. Okay. What do they call their world in their language?
They don't speak. Everything is a symbol there. The whole race is telepathic, and I want to back up just a little bit. There are 28 different races there. Not all are human. Many are dimensional, plasmic, organic, that were there before the human aspect of the Andromedans themselves, or the Lyrans got there and became Andromedans. There's a lot of life on the different dimensional levels that if we were to go to fifth density, we would be physical on fifth density, even though here we're on third density. Our perspective of them is being spirit. So, on each of the different dimensions, there is an abundance of life that is completely different than how we would perceive it. Because, our perception is of what third density is like. Even fourth density is very different, but we will have physical form in fourth density.
Now, is third density the lowest density, or are there others lower?
The animal and insect kingdoms would be, in planetary systems, would be considered lower, but to be perfectly honest with you, I've not had a clear definition of that, because I haven't asked. My focus really has been us, and where do we go from here?
Right.
So
Now, what is the main difference between the third density and the fourth density?
the real difference is consciousness. In fourth density, you can pretty much instantly create what it is that you think. Whatever your thoughts are, you manifest almost instantaneously. So there is a major degree of responsibility in dealing with that. Also in fourth density, we become more of a group mind. In fourth density, we're all telepathic. In other words, everybody can read each other's minds, which means you have to be real. You can't have hidden agendas because people will see right through you. Also in fourth density, we all become clairvoyants. We'll be able to see energy fields, see life forms, which means that if you're hiding something, it'll be seen instantaneously. They've also said that in fourth density, when we move into that, our court systems will change. There's still a positive and negative. That exists all the way to the fifth density, where you will experience to a strong degree the dualities in our everyday environments. What will happen is you'll have a judge and you'll have a jury who will all be clairvoyants, and they will read the energy field and know who's telling the truth and who isn't. And everything will be judged based on that, will be based on energy, not on words. When you, in fourth density, when you walk by somebody or you touch somebody's hand, you will instantly know everything about them. So again, there'll be no hidden agendas. Everybody will really have to be real. And if they choose to have and continue to play out their agendas, whatever those are, then they will have the space. But you will know, or people will know, I will know who we're dealing with instantaneously.
So, as you've heard, and as I told you before, the origin of mankind is based on different aspects: scientific, creation theory, and the mythical theories. Sorry, I forgot to explain the mythical theories. The mythical theories are theories that are based on different cultures, not traditions, okay, not religion, but cultures and traditions. Because people might share the same religion, but they don't share the same traditions and culture. And this is why I explained that. For example, we have the Kikuyu of Kenya and we have the Luo of Kenya. The Kikuyus believe that God, who is called Ngai, created the first human beings, Mumbi and his wife, and his and Mumbi and his wife over there. And so Mumbi and his wife gave birth to 9 daughters. These 9 daughters are the ones who came up with the tribe of the Kikuyu we have today. That is the mythical theory. So each tribe has their own. According to Charles Darwin, we can find that he explains the progressive evolution of organisms depending on some steps. The first step was adaptation. The second one was isolation. The third one was natural selection. Charles Darwin was heavily emphasizing on not on strength but on adaptability. He said that organisms that were able to adapt are those organisms that were able to survive. Yes, and so we have the biblical theory that explains the origin of mankind as explained by the white pastor. This is a ton of perspective. These are different kind of perspective, and I myself, I personally believe in the creation theory. I believe that the person that I am today was not a person that evolved from monkey. I am a person that was made by the image and likeness of the Most High God, the Father of Jesus Christ, God Himself, Jehovah, Yahweh, Melchizedek, the Most High. You understand? So if I believe this, I believe that you should also believe that we have a creator, because we didn't create ourselves. There's no scientific proof enough to explain how we are. Our brains are are wired computers, organic computers, which are heavily wired. They are highly convoluted to understand. No scientist has fully understood the functionality of the human brain completely up to date, because there is something which is called plasticity. Plasticity is the brain is always just adjusting itself. It's always learning new things. It's not like a computer. A computer which is dumb today will be dumb tomorrow, but a human being who is dumb today might not be dumb tomorrow. We learn new things and we share new skills, something that computers have still not been able to achieve. Even with the modern age of AI, there are things that AI cannot understand. They cannot understand human relationships and all that. The concept of race is a concept that was created by the white person to fill in to find a space that he would fill his evil deeds, to find a space that would accommodate his acts of slavery and all that. But race was never there. We had people who were adapted to particular climatic conditions, and so their skin changed. Like me, for example, if you stay in the house so long, what happens? You become pale, you become light. But if you go outside, your skin starts to change. So in Africa, it's very tropical. There's a lot of sunlight hitting the continent. So it was important, it was adaptive for us to survive by having a dark skin like the one you see on me. Most people who are Africans don't have black. But the pastor said he saw someone with black. That is a characteristics of African, and a characteristics that is helping us to survive the harsh climatic conditions that have always existed. So I believe and I hope that you find value in this video. You're able to understand the origin of mankind from a perspective of Christianity. So thanks for watching this video. Remember to subscribe, and see you in the next one.